the pipes are coming. Oh, Jesus! Oh, gummy skin! She's peeling me stuff!
I remember back in 2016 when this freaked the internet out. It's very rare that we get to hear characters from an official animated feature drop the F-bomb. So it definitely turned a lot of heads when the movie came in to break the status quo of animated films with its R rating. And after watching it, the R was very well deserved. Everything about this movie is crazy. The story is wild, the comedy is outrageous, the shock value has no limits, and even the making of this film was said to be insane. And I remember how the latter was a major controversy. It was so crazy that it got me curious to learn about what happened behind the scenes and what caused the chaos. But as I was looking for the answer, I knew it wasn't as easy as it seemed. So I went deeper and deeper and deeper than I ever expected when jumping into this. It led me down a rabbit hole that is more shocking than the film's orgy scene. It didn't just reveal what went wrong during the making of this movie, but it also exposes a critical problem with the entire animation industry that is still corrupting it to this day. This is not just a story about an animated feature with a chaotic production, but it is also a cautionary tale of what happens when we remain silent about the issue. If it remains ignored, then the problem will become the new standard. As the Twinkie said it best,
once you see that it'll you up for life.
So, what happened during Sausage Party? Well, let's find out. Oh, and before we begin, I just want to put up a big disclaimer. Regardless of how you will feel, please do not harass any of the names that I mention here. Going out of your way to attack them will make you as bad as those people, and I condemn any form of harassment for whatever reason. If you could just not do that, then you're already a better person than most people who still use Twitter.
The art of the trade, how the sausage gets made.
Our story begins with the starring actor, writer, producer, and creator of Sausage Party, Seth Rogen. In the late 2000s, Rogen had a thought regarding Pixar. You know that meme about how Pixar movies are all about if you give literally anything feelings? What if toys had feelings? What if fish had feelings? What if cars had feelings? What if the elements had feelings? What if feelings had feelings? Well, Rogen realized that before it was a meme. This led him to think, what if you gave feelings to food? Yes, there were cartoons that have presented that in their own way, filled with laughs and smiles, but when he thought about the food's true purpose in life, he then discovered that it would have been a true nightmare. For the food, of course, but as a movie concept, it was great. From there, Seth and his writing and producing partner, Evan Goldberg, got to work on the idea about sentient food living in a supermarket, where one sausage named Frank learns about what happens to them when they're bought by humans and leave the store.
The gods kill our asses.
What, are you crazy? That doesn't make any sense. Why would the gods want to kill us? That makes no sense.
Because it makes them stronger?
The goal that they had in mind with the movie was to be a parody of modern kids' films, specifically to satirize the ones by Disney and Pixar, and make fun of their familiar tropes by pushing the envelope with them and be as wild as they could get away with. And as they were creating the film, they later decided to give the picture a social commentary that criticizes religion and how it is a detriment to our society with the way that it divides us while also promoting discrimination.
You had to travel with a bagel? How much did his dirty hand steal from you?
A ton.
But the biggest catch to this premise is that it contains something that very few animated features have, and one that mainstream studios virtually never make for their films: an R rating. Yes, adult animation has become commonplace over the years, and some of the most popular pieces of animation are geared towards adults, but the grand majority of them are TV shows and internet cartoons. Animated movies are almost exclusively family-friendly, where the most they could be is PG. There are are a few exceptions, like in Japan, but there are only a handful of animated features that has an R or even just a PG-13 rating that were either produced in the US or made by the major studios. They can range from the Ralph Bakshi films like Fritz the Cat, Coonskin, and American Pop, to features based on adult shows like The Simpsons Movie and South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, to art house films like Anomalisa and Waking Life. There are also some of the DC animated movies that Warner Brothers occasionally produces, but they generally get released straight to home media. The point is that R-rated animated films only come once in a blue moon, and the reason why is because studios do not want to take the risk. Sure, it is the one aspect that makes it stand out from the other animated films, and it was the biggest motivator for the team to prove that animation can be so much more than kids stuff, but it is also what made it so hard to sell. As they were trying to find a studio willing to give them the money to bring these groceries to life, and pitch to just about every single one they could talk to, both big and small, twice, the one benefit from that long search was having the time to develop the concept and form a small crew, where the idea was first revealed by Goldberg in mid-2010 and later confirmed by Jonah Hill a few months later, who was also involved in the project as a voice, producer, and writer. Since the guys didn't have much experience producing an animated feature, Seth hired DreamWorks veteran Conrad Vernon to be the director, whom the two previously collaborated on Monsters vs. Aliens. And soon after, Vernon brought on board an old colleague that he knew from working on Ralph Bakshi's Cool World, Greg Tiernan. What made him a valued member to the team was not just his years of experience in animation alongside Conrad, but he also supplied the movie's animation studio. Back in 2003, not long after he moved to Canada, he and his wife founded Nitrogen Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's worth noting that this was their first animated film that they fully produced. Previously, they only provided assistance for the film Happily Never After and some video games, along with providing the animation of Thomas and Friends between the 13th and 16th season. So, for the studio, this was an entirely new experience. It wasn't until September of 2013 when Sony Pictures Entertainment and Annapurna Pictures, thanks to Annapurna's Megan Ellison first choosing to make this movie happen, announced that they teamed up to help Rogen and Goldberg to give them the finance that they were looking for. But even if one problem was solved, the companies handed them another. They didn't want to take a big risk on this movie, since R-rated films at the time were not known to be major blockbusters. So the two provided the team with a budget of $19 million. To put it in perspective, the 2023 Five Nights at Freddy's movie had a slightly bigger budget at $20 million. And yet, even with a budget smaller than Toy Story, they were expected to make something that looks like Toy Story 3.
I have to try.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Me, right?
Wait.
In the following year, on top of setting the release date for the summer of 2016, they also revealed that the movie had an impressive list of celebrities for its cast. Alongside Rogen and Hill, there is also Kristen Wiig, Michael Cera, Selma Hayek, Edward Norton, David Krumholtz, Bill Hader, Danny McBride, James Franco, Craig Robinson, Paul Rudd, Nick Kroll, and more. Also, to make it more authentic as a Disney parody, they hired one of Disney's most prominent composers, Alan Menken, to work on the music with Christopher Lenertz. Menken also brought in his lyricist partner, Glenn Slater, to write the movie's musical number. They wrote about 5 or 6 potential songs, but the one that the team ultimately went with was The Great Beyond.
It's a lot of songs. And I think they're all good, if I must say so myself.
However, one important note about their goal for an R rating was that the key word here is goal. That didn't mean that it was officially R-rated since development started. They had to submit the film to the Motion Picture Association of America in order to seal the deal. But when they did, the producers' fears became real when they were sent an NC-17 rating. How much did they have to cut? Did they push the crudeness too far? Was the movie too raunchy to even be shown in theaters? Actually, no. The MPAA just wanted them to remove the pubes off of Lavash's balls. Then they would be safe enough to have an R rating.
There is a pita bread, and you see his ball sack in the end orgy, and it had hair on it.
Right.
And they asked we remove the hair from the pita bread's ball sack.
Fine, all right, we'll do it.
Exactly. So we digitally shaved the pita bread's ball sack and removed the hair from it.
In 2016, as it was getting closer to its release date, Sausage Party was gradually making itself and the insanity that it contains known to the public. The movie made its first premiere on March 14th at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas as a work-in-progress cut, with both the opening musical number and the sex-filled climax showing their animation unfinished, which led to the Red Band trailer out in mid-May on the internet and on the big screen during previews. There was even one theater in Concord, California that figured, well, since this is an animated film, you know which screening this should be put in front of? Finding Dory.
Children! Children!
When the movie was finished, it was first shown at the Just for Laughs Festival in Montreal, Canada on July 30th, and then was officially released in theaters on August 12th, where the outcome was oh so delicious. Critics genuinely enjoyed the feature by saying that while the raunchiness and the adult nature can feel too much at times, it has strong comedy, great voice acting, it's surprisingly smart, and even the animation is not too shabby. As for how it did at the box office, it may seem unimpressive at first, only making $97.7 million domestically and a worldwide total of $140.7 million. It's nothing compared to other animated films from that year like Zootopia and The Secret Life of Pets, but keep in mind that the budget was just $19 million. So even with those numbers, it was highly profitable. In fact, for a few years, it held the title for the highest grossing R-rated animated film of all time before it was beaten by Demon Slayer Mugen Train in 2020. It was on its way to become a bizarre success story on the horniest foods ever put on the big screen. But as much as it may love shocking its audience with swear words, violence, and sexual innuendos, the moment that shocked people the most from Sausage Party was something very unexpected. And the craziest part about it is that it wasn't from anything in the movie, but rather from the comments section of an article. On the same day as the movie's release, the website Cartoon Brew released an article where they interview the directors Conrad Vernon and Greg Tiernan. It's the typical interview that was meant to promote the film by highlighting both the triumphs and the challenges that came with making the picture. But what really caught everyone's attention was the comments that people left in the article. Specifically, from dozens of anonymous animators who alleged that, despite doing some work in the film, they were left uncredited and that the work environment of the production was a nightmare. At this point, I could just summarize what happened at Nitrogen Studios during the making of Sausage Party, but I think I'll let the comments speak for themselves.
The production costs were kept low because Greg would demand people work overtime for free. If you wouldn't work late for free, your work would be assigned to someone who would stay late or come in on the weekend. Some artists were even threatened with termination for not staying late to hit a deadline. The animation department signed a petition for better treatment and paid overtime. When the letter got to Annapurna, they stepped in and saw that artists were paid and fed when overtime was needed. Over 30 animators left during the course of the production due to the stress and expectations. Most of them left before the paid overtime was implemented. This was met with animosity and was taken as a personal insult to the owners. Their names were omitted from the final credits despite working for over a year on this film.
Almost half of the animation team was not credited. The team believed in this film, poured their hearts and souls into it, and despite this, more than half of it was not credited. You can see the full team on the IMDb, which contains around 83 people, and I am certain there are some missing. The film's credits, however, contains 47. This was Nitrogen Studios' first animated feature, and no pipeline had been set up. It was extremely rocky on the production end. The studio management had little knowledge on how to proceed, and the film could not have been made without the hard work of experienced artists. The production went over a year of what it was originally projected to due to poor organization. The team had to fight for fair compensation, and a lot of artists needed to quit due to unfair practices and poor management. The studio had lost such a massive portion of the the team by the end of production, more than half, that they had to resort to hiring recent animation graduates to finish the film. What we currently see in the credits are the students, as well as animators who stayed to the end of production, as well as a couple who left before the finishing of the film. Most of the animators who are not credited had been on the show for more than a year and a half, which is most of the production time. These are people who have worked hard to set a style for a show and have their work used as promotion for the film. Nitrogen has been trying really hard to hide this from producers, so I doubt that Seth Rogen even knows this. I hope that this can get the word out.
I loved The Sausage Party and really want more films like it to get made. I too worked for it and did not get credit. I feel that Nitrogen Studios treated the production like the preschool television that they're used to producing. TV productions are notorious for not paying overtime, and Nitrogen went in with the same idea. In the time I was there, I saw many of our supervisors get abusively treated and fired. The incidents people are mentioning are all true. It made me lose all respect for Greg Tiernan, who adopted a very medieval attitude towards his employees. The fact that so many people left itself speaks for how they felt about Nitrogen. I feel this film got made by the efforts of all the employees who worked for it in spite of the treatment they received or saw their fellow artists receive. Overall, I have seen such things happen too many times in the animation industry where companies get away with devaluing and exploiting their employees unlike any other industry in today's society.
I could say that working on this crazy project was a hell of a ride. I hope that in the near future we could have more adult animated feature films. However, I will not be working with Nitrogen Studios again, not even on Sausage Party 2. My contract ended before the end of the project. I decided to move back home for my own personal reasons. I went with my friends to see it on screen and was surprised it was to see that I did not get any credit for my work. I realized it wasn't only me, every member of the crew that didn't get to the finish line wasn't credited. Working with Greg in the Nitrogen production was a nightmare for any artist. We believed in that project and stayed despite that fact. Not getting any credit for our work is the last straw.
I worked as an animator in Nitrogen Studios on The Sausage Party. All of my shots are in the trailer, and I didn't get the screen credit. It was a really stressful atmosphere over there. Most of the core team who shaped the animation style and the characters' body language didn't get screen credit. It was the final stab on the back of the animators, the poor foot soldiers of every project.
In many of these comments, they all share a similar sentiment where they are proud of working on such an unconventional movie where they can make their characters be as dirty as they can. But the way that the studio was being managed by Greg Tiernan and how he punished those who didn't tolerate its toxicity by not giving them credits or overtime pay did not make the experience worth it. Over time, several media outlets picked up on what was said in the comments, and news started to spread about how animators were treated badly during Sausage Party's production. In those articles, the anonymous animators went further into their experience both during Sausage Party and how it was unfortunately common to have this happen in Vancouver's animation business, including how Nitrogen did not have an HR department to issue their complaints about their treatment, and that they wrote an open letter a few months prior to call out the problems, but that did not solve anything. However, in the same articles, Tiernan had a chance to say his side of the story by commenting,
"These statements are without merit. Our production adhered to all overtime regulations and our contractual obligations to our artists. Anytime that any concern was brought up, it was handled appropriately."
Basically, he denied any wrongdoing while the companies who financed the picture took Greg's side and refused to take action to help the artists. Unfortunately, the latter was the reason why Tiernan did not receive any significant consequences other than public backlash. A year after Sausage Party, he was able to sell his studio to Cinesite, and he later teamed up with Conrad Vernon again to direct the animated Addams Family movies for MGM. And yes, the studio is still producing animation to this day. Maybe some could argue that his reputation was scarred from the controversy, and is probably why he wasn't brought back for the Sausage Party series Foodtopia, similar to how other controversial names like Jonah Hill and James Franco did not return. But after the film's release and the animators expressed what they went through, it was as if everyone moved on like this was all just part of the business. At this point, I could just end this off here and answer the question to what happened during Sausage Party by saying that Greg Tiernan is the bad guy for the way he treated his animators. Yes, how he was managing Nitrogen was clearly wrong, but there were also a couple of significant factors at play that were equally as responsible for the torturous production: Sony and Annapurna. And the clue as to why can be found in the budget. If you know anything about making animated features, especially computer animated ones, the two companies giving them just $19 million to produce the film should have raised a big red flag. Yes, I know that there have been plenty of animated films, even nowadays, that have to work with a significantly smaller budget. But the flaw with that argument is that they only happen with independent features that couldn't get help from Hollywood. They could only make with what little they have. Sausage Party is anything but independent. This is a computer animated movie from a major studio that features an all-star cast. $19 million wouldn't even cover a fraction of the cost of a proper production. And speaking of that cast, considering that it features over a dozen big names to do the voices, you know that a large portion of that budget went to them, among other payments to produce the picture like the music. And the animation team were left with next to nothing. I'm not making excuses for Tiernan. Again, his actions and the way he ran Nitrogen was unacceptable. But I'm just saying that the production would have gone smoother if the studio gave them more money to work with. As for those studios, it's one thing for Annapurna acting ignorant on the matter, since this was their first animated feature they got involved with and were relatively new to that style of filmmaking. But Sony, on the other hand, they had no excuse to let that happen under their watch. Out of everyone in this situation, they should have known the best when it comes to financing and handling a production of an animated feature, considering that they have a major studio of their own. By the way, on a side note, some might be wondering, wasn't there any way to prevent all the bad stuff that happened at Nitrogen? You know, set up some rules to ensure that the well-being of animators is prioritized? Well, as a matter of fact, there technically is. It's called a union. In the case of animators, the ones representing them is the Animation Guild, where they have specific obligations that the studios must uphold with members, including a set wage rate for their salaries, mandatory payments when working overtime, and an upgraded rate to give them when doing so, along with protection from hostile work environments where they will take action to defend their members from productions that go out of line, among many other benefits like healthcare. However, there's just one problem. Just about all the representation for the Animation Guild was found exclusively in the Los Angeles area. Keep in mind that Nitrogen Studios was in Vancouver, BC, and at the time, there was no animation union in Canada. And without any unions protecting artists, the studios have the freedom to set their own rules where they can prioritize saving money by any means necessary. And under those circumstances, one of the first things to usually get dropped is the well-being of the employees. Because for companies, it's literally a small price to pay in order to gain more profits. And I believe that Sony knew this very well. In fact, this is Sony's dirty secret to maintaining a low budget on their animated films. They dodge unions by outsourcing the animation. Technically, their in-house cartoon studio, Sony Pictures Animation, is registered with the Animation Guild, but the studio in Culver City is only responsible for developing the foundation and the concepts of their movies. The place where most of the animators are to create the visuals, however, is at another studio called Sony Pictures Imageworks at, you guessed it, Vancouver, where they can happily skip working with unionized animators and instead get tax credits from the BC government. I guess that guild representation at Sony Animation means that they like to pretend to care. And because of that, toxic work environments like sausage parties are not the first nor the last that happened during a Sony production. I'll even go further and say that there are two filmmakers who frequently collaborated with the company that have a history of treating their workers similarly to how Greg Tiernan treated his animators at Nitrogen. You'd think that if they are that continuously hostile, Sony would eventually get rid of them for being more trouble than they're worth. But the truth is that they can't, because they're not just some of their most toxic filmmakers, they're also their most acclaimed ones. During the 2010s, Phil Lord and Chris Miller were considered the hot dynamic duo of Hollywood. With their signature style of bombastic comedy and a keen sense of storytelling, they quickly became household names where that alone can be used to promote their projects. And what's more, each movie they made felt better than the last as they became more ambitious and innovative. But even as they expand their filmmaking skills, they always devote themselves to the medium of animation. It was how they got their start in the entertainment business, and they always carry their love for it wherever they go. That's why they are considered to be two of the few recognizable filmmakers in Hollywood who are like the champions of animation, advocating for the medium to be taken seriously. One of the biggest years of their careers was 2023, where they had several prominent projects released at that time. These include 2 R-rated comedies with Universal, Cocaine Bear and Strays, the long-awaited second season of their fan-favorite series Clone High, and the sequel to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse titled Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, to which they were credited as writers and producers. The latter was easily the most anticipated of them all, as the first was often considered to be one of the most revolutionary movies in recent years. And by the time it came out on June 2nd, 2023, Miles Morales was able to make lightning strike twice. It got high praise from critics and audiences. It was one of the highest grossing films of the year with over $381 million domestically and nearly $691 million worldwide, and collected a large portion of awards, mainly for Best Animated Feature. It was widely celebrated as a crowning achievement for both animation and the superhero genre, and it made audiences even more hyped up for what will happen next after that intense cliffhanger. But a few weeks after the release of the movie, people learned about how the acclaimed picture was made, and that moment of celebration quickly turned into shock. The entertainment news website Vulture released an article called Spider-Verse Artists Say Working on the Sequel Was Death by 1,000 Paper Cuts, where 4 anonymous animators revealed that they endured terrible working conditions during the film's production, and the primary source of the problem was Phil Lord. They presented to the public the unique style of Lord's filmmaking. In normal productions, whenever the crew has to solve any story problems, they would reserve it for the pre-production, leaving a small portion of the crew to handle that before they can be finalized and sent over to the animation team. But according to the animators, Phil Lord didn't seem to understand that. His approach was allegedly to make everyone create the scenes to completion before he could determine any story changes. And if he didn't like the direction it was going, which is said to be most of the time, he took all those days of hard work from hundreds of people and threw it in the trash just to make them redo it all over again. During that time, they said that this process was repeated up to 5 times for each shot, where everyone had to keep rebuilding it from the bottom to the top until it got Lord's approval. But even when it does, it meant absolutely nothing because he kept changing the story throughout development and then demanded to scrap finished scenes that were approved so that the team would have to rebuild them all over again just to accommodate his updates. It doesn't matter if the movie had 3 directors, as producer and writer, Lord had the final say on everything. You remember that one episode of Family Guy where Peter was producing a stage production of The King and I, and everyone had a hard time catching up with his ideas because he kept changing the whole play on the spot? That's what they say is Phil Lord's work ethic.
Now remember, Diane, you're playing Anna, a Steel Town girl on a Saturday night looking for the fight of her life.
Where does it say that?
In my noodle.
But his need to change the story was claimed to be at its worst during the spring of 2021, where for 3 to 6 months, Lord was making massive updates to the entire script while the animators were just sitting there doing nothing. But when it was time to get back to work, they spent over a year of catching up for that lost time while also dealing with Phil's grueling management, resulting in the animators to work an average of 11 hours a day, 7 days a week, and around 70 hours per week. And this took a serious mental toll on the entire team. Because of the type of work environment, the production of Across the Spider-Verse was massively stressful, and morale among the team was completely low. And according to the animators, as much as Sony boasted to have the record of the most artists working on an animated movie with over 1,000 involved, about 100 of them quit before it was finished because the toxicity was too much. But it wasn't just the animators who got upset with Lord. Even Sony was allegedly mad at the way he was making the movie, and it occasionally happened when he got into fights with the company for his mismanagement. And while the pandemic did play a factor, it was mainly because of his work ethic why the movie had to be delayed twice from April of 2022 to October of that year to June of 2023. But since most of the criticisms were towards Phil, what about Chris? Do they have anything to say about him? Actually, they barely had any comments, because he was barely there in the first place. According to the animators, Miller was mostly missing in action until he got involved during the last 2 months of production so that he could give his notes to the team for his changes. Maybe he was busy with some of the other projects they simultaneously had going on, but whatever he was doing, it was mostly not related to Across the Spider-Verse, and especially not keeping Phil under control. That's why I think Miller shouldn't be off the hook from this. He may not have contributed to the toxicity as much as Phil, but if it's always Lord and Miller when it comes to their achievements, then it should also be Lord and Miller to be held accountable for their misconducts. It's true that stuff like this happens during productions of movies, like rewriting the script in the middle of development or change some of the scenes that were already finished, but never in the levels of a Lord and Miller production that caused this much stress and frustration over the way they keep wasting a lot of hard work. On a side note, it's interesting how Sony promoted that the movie was made on a modest $100 million budget, but the article stated that the budget was actually a lot bigger at $150 million. If that's the case, why would they lie about the budget? Did that other $50 million not count because that was how much Lord wasted on unused completed shots? It's also worth noting that the article talked with the executive vice president and general manager of Sony Pictures Imageworks, Michelle Grady, and fellow producer Amy Pascal, where they stepped in to refute the animators' arguments and defend Phil Lord. However, they didn't do that good of a job. All they did was deny the claims and add a bit of victim blaming. There was even one part where they talked about how morale was low from redoing scenes 5 times in a row, and Pascal responded with, I guess. Welcome to making a movie.
What?
Ooh, okay.
Miles,
are you trying to kill your mother?
Now, I am aware that it may seem like I went a little off topic to discuss about a completely different movie, but there is a good reason to why I brought this up. If you paid attention to what the animators were saying, this all sounds awfully familiar now, doesn't it? An animated movie from Sony Pictures with a pair of creative leaders where one of them mainly caused a toxic work environment filled with stress and forced animators to overwork on a regular basis in a non-union facility to the point that a large portion of the team had to quit because the bad treatment they received was becoming too much. What happened during Across the Spider-Verse was almost identical to the production of Sausage Party. Just switch Greg Tiernan with Phil Lord and you virtually have the same story. But that's not even the worst part about this. Some could argue that maybe Spider-Verse's production was excruciating because of the pressure of making a sequel to a beloved picture. They wouldn't be so demanding if they weren't keen on maintaining or even surpassing the standards of the first. So maybe that was just their one instance of a troubled production, right?
He's lying, and I think you know it.
The animators claim that this toxic work ethic is the way that Lord and Miller have always made their movies, and this story can be found in all of their animated features they've worked on. They did this with the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs films, the Lego movies, the Mitchells vs. the Machines, and the Spider-Verse films. I cannot confirm if the same occurred in their live-action productions or their series, but I'm just saying, I think I know why they got fired from the Han Solo movie. This has been such an ongoing problem that their reputation within the animation industry is not as admirable as their works. There are many artists who say that they never want to work with Phil Lord again after having that experience. And by the time the article went viral, they both were keeping their mouths shut in the hopes that people could forget about it and move on to praising them for Spider-Verse. The only time they ever responded to this was from an interview with Variety a few months later, where Phil Lord stated,
"In terms of Spider-Verse, that was a really hard movie to make. We're really proud of how hard everybody worked, and it was very demanding. But we're just really proud of the crew and everything they put into it."
No apology, no acknowledgement of their own flaws, not even addressing any of the claims. Just a short and manufactured blanket statement that just says,
"I'm proud of you, Flint."
You know, that reminds me how Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs started with that message that the movie was made by a lot of people, and now, just like the rest of the movie, I look back at it and all I see is cringe. Don't you just love it when your movie begins with virtue signaling? And yet, the reason why this is such a never-ending problem is, well, they're Phil Lord and Chris Miller. They have a reputation of making successful movies to maintain that not many could confront them about their destructive work ethic. And as long as their projects still get praise, profits, and awards, they'll keep getting away with it and still be considered acclaimed filmmakers. In fact, the most that the article did was make Lord and Miller's reputation be, at worst, divided among fans, where one side condemns them for how they poorly treat their animators in order to achieve their fame, while the other still sees them as the filmmaking legends that gave us the Lego Movie and Spider-Verse, and take offense if they hear anything about them or their works that isn't positive. And if you don't believe me, then take a look at the comments. There's a good chance you'll find at least one person who is upset at me for criticizing Lord and Miller and would probably use the same defense as Amy Pascal. This is also why you don't see many influencers and public figures use their platforms to call them out. The love for Spider-Verse is so strong that not many people care about what happened behind the scenes, and the fear of angering the most devoted fans is enough to hold them back. And yet, the more I look at this, the more I question about the duo's image as the champions of animation. I don't doubt that they have a strong passion for the medium, but based on what the animators said, I don't think we should have them represent the medium when they treat the people in it the same way the Oscars treat animation. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Sony played a significant role in letting the toxicity of productions like Sausage Party and Across the Spider-Verse happen. They not only have a history of enabling this, but they could sometimes contribute to the problem as well. Because there are no unions to set the wages at ImageWorks, the animators claim that Sony kept lowballing them on their salary with the promise that they would see the rest when they get their overtime pay. And one part that was heartbreaking to read was that some of the artists were migrants, people who depend on these jobs in order to stay in Canada and didn't have any alternatives to escape that environment. So not only did Sony, Lord, and Miller took advantage of non-union workers, but they also exploited migrants. And because of how successful Across the Spider-Verse became, you know the duo won't be facing consequences from their bosses, and they'll most likely repeat the same process when making Beyond the Spider-Verse. Oh, speaking of which, originally that movie was supposed to be released not long after Across the Spider-Verse on March 29th, 2024. However, by the time the animators were interviewed and were finishing up the second film, they stated that little to no progress was made on Beyond, and that there was no way that it was going to come out at that time. And surely enough, on July of that year, Sony revealed that they removed the release date of the third movie without giving it a new one. The reason why they revealed it at that time was to make it look like the delay was caused by the writers and actors strike. And while it may have played a factor in slowing development down, I think we know why we didn't get it sooner. However, going back to our main subject, saying that it's only Sony who is responsible for having toxic work environments in animation is disingenuous. Because the truth is that this isn't just a Sony problem. I'd like to clarify that I am aware outsourcing animation is nothing new. It's a practice that's been going on for decades. In fact, it's a standard for television animation to have their visuals be done overseas. And there have been several animated features in the past that had the assistance outside of the US to help mainstream studios. However, the use of outsourcing from other countries as the main source for the animation of movies in order to reduce costs became more of a thing in Hollywood after the arrival of the 21st century, when competition rapidly emerged. For modern animation, Sony was one of the first to set this format, and as studios started to look for ways to produce their films at a lower cost, others followed suit, especially for the purpose of avoiding unions when they are considered to be in the way of reducing budgets. Over time, the amount of animated films that are entirely produced in the US have significantly decreased, and the ones that you watch either on the big screen or streaming have most likely had their animation done in a place where it's too far for the Animation Guild to touch them. There was a time when the Los Angeles area used to be the hotspot for mainstream animation, but now jobs have been moving out to other places outside of the US, including Canadian cities like Vancouver and Montreal, European countries like France and Spain, and other countries across the globe like Australia and China. And if those studios are not completely bought out to only make movies for their buyer, like when Netflix bought Animalogic or when Illumination bought MacGuff, they'd provide animation to whoever calls them. In the case of Sony Pictures Imageworks, you'd think that because of the name, they'd provide the visuals exclusively for Sony. But in reality, they let many other companies use their tools. On top of their work on visual effects, they provided animation for movies from Warner Brothers, like with Smallfoot, Netflix for films like Over the Moon and The Sea Beast, and their latest partner, DreamWorks Animation. There was a time when the studio used to make their features completely in-house, but ever since they had to downgrade in the mid-2010s and then got acquired by Comcast, they started to look for alternatives to make their movies at a lower cost. On October of 2023, they revealed that they updated their business format to be similar to Sony Animation. This is to gain a mixed production model where their animated films from 2025 onward will be made at both DreamWorks and Sony Pictures Imageworks. Oh, that and they laid off 70 workers at the studio as part of their cost reduction, as if the news didn't demotivate the animators there enough. As I'm making this, the only major animation studios who make their movies completely in-house in the US are Pixar and Disney Animation. And even the latter is becoming questionable, since they opened a new studio in Vancouver and might look for ways to make their films cheaper after some of their recent features flopped. Don't know if they will, but I wouldn't be surprised if they end up jumping on that bandwagon too. But why do I bring this up? Because union dodging is now a common practice in the animation industry, where studios prioritize profits over the well-being of their workers. And the more they pursue to make their projects cheaper, the more likely that toxic productions will happen when making them. Granted, this is not to say that all studios who outsource their animation treat their artists badly, such as said to be the case with Illumination. However, others have their fair share of agonizing productions and general toxic work environments, where animators claim that it is also the case at Paramount Animation and Skydance Animation. And this is not to mention about the threat of AI that's giving studios an extra reason to dodge unions so that they could use the technology as another cost-saving tactic, putting the careers of artists and animators in possible jeopardy. I could go on about this issue, but that requires a whole other video to talk about that one. So when you look at the big picture and see how the entire industry is operated and still continue to let their workers occasionally get taken advantage of, is it honestly a surprise that the production of Sausage Party happened the way it did?
Prepare yourself, for you're about to learn the terrible truth.
I think now is the time that we can answer to what happened during the making of the movie. You see, Sausage Party is not an example of a production gone wrong due to a monstrous director going too hard on the artists, but rather, it is a victim of a system that lets these working conditions happen. A capitalist model where making money is the most important goal to achieve, while everything else is just optional. Some may say it is a fault in the system that workers get mistreated and sometimes underpaid, but the reality is that as long as it helps to make more money for the companies, this is considered a feature, not an issue. It's upsetting because the people who receive the setbacks of this are the ones responsible for bringing these movies to life. We wouldn't have these animated films if it weren't for their artistry and hard work. I get it. It sucks when you hear that the films you love were made by bad individuals who caused the experience to be a nightmare for the people creating them. And while there are ways to prevent them, the ones with the most power would rather let it happen if it saves them more money in the long run. But I'm sure at this point, some may have this question. Throughout this story, we've seen a lot of problems within the animation industry that still persists today, and some may want to take action to see things set right, and that animators should never suffer for their art. Is there a way for us to stop this from happening again and to end the toxicity in those work environments? My answer to that is, I don't know. I don't have a single answer for that. Look, I'm gonna be honest with you all. I'm just an animation fan. The only experience I actually have in the industry is working as a voice actor, and that's it. The truth is that you won't find that answer by watching a YouTube video, no matter how popular or confident the influencers present themselves as. I could easily join my fellow cartoon reviewers and say that watching indie animation that you can easily find on the internet will solve everything, but ask any professional animator and they'll tell you that it will do absolutely nothing. I'm not expecting to change the world with this. I just wanted to address a problem in the animation industry with information that's available to the public, and use Sausage Party as an example. However, I'm not here to express nihilism. I do have one idea you can do to help artists. Express your support. Show that you care about the people behind your favorite cartoons, and show your love for them any way you can. Follow their social medias, give them a little donation, tell them that they're doing a great job. Make them feel like their artistry is worth it. Also, don't be afraid to call out the mistreatments, no matter who's doing it. Rather, if there's someone you're unfamiliar with, like Greg Tiernan, someone who is highly regarded, like Phil Lord, or a company like Sony Pictures. Keep in mind, though, that we're not canceling anybody. We're condemning the actions themselves while holding those who do it accountable. At the same time, while calling out the bad actions, celebrate those who do good and treat their animators with respect. Going back to one of Sausage Party's key players, Seth Rogen established a healthy work ethic at his company, Point Grey. One person who admired that was Jeff Rowe, the writer and co-director of The Mitchells vs. the Machines. When hired to direct Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, he made sure that the team he worked with was as comfortable as possible so that their morale stayed high and never have them overworked. And yet, despite having the opposite of a Lord and Miller production, the movie was still a big hit and got high praise from critics and fans. So this proves that people like Amy Pascal, who think that artists have to suffer in order to make good art and tolerate filmmakers like Phil Lord, have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And it's very important to note that you can still enjoy those movies regardless. I'm not saying to boycott those features at all. In fact, I enjoyed Sausage Party and I love Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. It's all in the matter of separating the art from the artist. And it's sometimes necessary to keep enjoying the things we love. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Pixar films, but that's not going to stop me from acknowledging that John Lasseter is a sexual predator who doesn't deserve to keep working in the industry. Besides, there are plenty of other people to look up to that you could pass over the credit to them. So instead of calling Across the Spider-Verse a movie by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, you could say that it was made by the directors Joaquin Dos Santos, Justin K. Thompson, and Kemp Powers. Instead of calling Greg Tiernan the director of Sausage Party, you can look upon Conrad Vernon as the man who helmed the picture. But especially, don't forget to show your support to the industry's union, the Animation Guild. Sure, they may not be perfect, but as we've seen here, they're definitely better than nothing. They keep on fighting to make sure that productions like those don't happen, while artists get what they need to turn their passion into a living. And it's not just the Animation Guild doing this fight. Other unions in all different fields ensure that their workers get their fair share. And since the writers and actors strike in 2023, unions have been motivated to become bigger and stronger to fight against corporate greed. And the best part is that it's working. So much so that we've been seeing more demand and growth from unionizing the workplace in recent years. Visual effects artists are starting to become members of the union, and Vancouver began to have unionized animation studios, starting with Titmouse Vancouver in 2021. At this point, it's only a matter of time when Sony Pictures Imageworks will start demanding to have their studio join the union. But the best part to our story is that it is thanks to unions that Sausage Party had a happy ending. Right after the controversy was revealed about the movie's toxic work environment, the Media Union of British Columbia, Unifor, filed a complaint to the British Columbia Employment Standards Branch regarding the artists to have their overtime pay. It wasn't until the end of March of 2019 when the branch ruled that they can finally have their long-awaited payment. Sure, they may not have their name in the credits, but at least they finally got their reward for the extra work they had to do under some hellish circumstances. These people are responsible for making us love animation every day. Don't you think they deserve better? Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, then give this a like and subscribe to my channel for more animation history. This project was created as my little way to show support to the artists of the industry and their well-being by raising awareness to some of the working conditions they have to endure. Also, I want to give out a huge thanks to all the people who lend their voice for the comments and quotes. I really appreciate the contribution to help bring those words to life. And of course, I want to thank you all for watching, and until next time, see you later, dudes.
What did he do to you? You don't wanna f***ing know.